Homer, you'll see that it's a very naturalistic world. And the order and the intelligibility of Homer, the appearance of each time of the gods and what they signify in terms of the context, the inner structure of the work, the way all the parts fit together, the architectonic structure of the Iliad and the Odyssey is astonishing. I mean, for those who go into it, like I have. So that therefore there isn't such a great gap between the two. As an example, the great heroine, see, if you read Homer's Odyssey, you can see that the real hero of the Odyssey is Penelope. She's the great figure because she's the one who was able to give Odysseus a plan of action. Athena didn't, even though Athena was supposed to be his great goddess who directed many of his activities. But the way she directed it was she gave him courage and strength, but not mind. Mind, the whole plan of how to deal with the suitors came from Penelope. In the end of the story, well, it's not actually in the end. It's when Odysseus goes down into Hades. He meets Agamemnon, and Agamemnon then praises his wife, Penelope, and contrasts her with Helen. Well, what's most remarkable, therefore, is that theme is picked up later in the work, and Penelope is said to be sung in the heavens. Her story is sung in the heavens by the gods, where Odysseus' story is sung by men. So she gains a much more powerful, not powerful in terms of powerful in terms of intelligibility, intelligence, directing, and therefore it's not mythological power, it's the power of intelligent craftiness of Penelope that makes the story successful. It's a long way to talking about it.
But back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, we're talking about anthropomorphized, we're talking about God as representing principles of nature, and now we make a leap with naturalistic philosophers.
If you don't mind, not principles of nature.
Well,
see, you can, if you want to get into the, well, it's if you would look at each time there's an occurrence of one of the gods in the Odyssey, right? And then you check the circumstances under which it appears, you'll find, as well as in the Iliad, but certainly in the Odyssey, that at each occasion there's a continuous identity of a state of mind that occurs throughout the entire story. The gods therefore represent states of mind more than natural forces. And the person who did some good work on this, by the way, is the Homeric Gods of Otto. And I would really recommend that. The Homeric Gods by Otto, O-T-T-O. He's perhaps the most interesting insight into states of mind as represented by gods and goddesses in the whole Greek literature, or classic literature. Yeah.
But then we reach a stage here in Ionia where we're speaking about then similar kind, dealing in the same area where these philosophers talking in terms that are beginning, because they're more abstract. They're not anthropomorphized in the same way as you could say, if you were talking about the universe or reality via the gods.
You see, one of the interesting things in comparative literature and comparative religion is that there are very few cultures that have produced anthropomorphic gods. In reality, there are very few that have a sustained anthropomorphic image. See, we are inheriting a 19th century criticism of anthropomorphic gods. But I would advise you, maybe we should sit down with a book on mythology of different cultures and see to what degree there is a consistent anthropomorphic god and how they function. You'll see that the Greeks are amazing in their difference. And Homer, of course. And the way in which they use myths. It's a very strict, and follows a very strict analogical structure. Very strict, and I could work it out for you if you want some time. Like you can take one of Plato's myths and you can structure it out in it. You can fit all of the terms of the myth, you can put down all the states of mind as represented. You can then have a matrix of ideas, you can check them off as a table. It's preeminently intelligible. Like mythical is not part of a myth, therefore.
I don't understand.
Okay, I'm taking the word myth and elevating it. I'm saying that it represents a very high composite of intellectual insights into a unity, rather than myth as mythical, trivial,
Oh yeah, no,
or anthropomorphic,
yeah.
and therefore can be rejected.
Well, and I don't
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting anthropomorphic in itself is a trivial thing either.
No, there's an ancient that really goes into this, a philosopher that really goes into this, that very few people study, who's probably the most significant philosopher of the classic world. And the most important work in this whole area that you're interested in is a work called The Theology of Plato by Proclus. All right, let me give you that. All right. He is the most systematic thinker in the classic world that brought together the entire corpus of Hellenic thought into a unity and brought it together as a systematic system. And Proclus, called The Theology of Plato. And in that work, he does this very thing. He takes all of the gods and show how they represent philosophical principles and how those philosophical principles can be represented in a schema. So if you want to grasp how the ancients themselves saw their own deities, I'd go for this. And it'll completely change your view. And that's worthwhile. Very few people study Proclus, even though he is perhaps the greatest thinker of that whole period.
More so than Plotinus, would you say?
Oh, Plotinus, if you go back to this image, the one, the intelligible soul and body, matter, Plotinus takes on the Parmenidean structure, which is this as well, and Plotinus shows the relationships of how you can move from one level to the other and the kinds of considerations that are presupposed in such a movement, spiritual development. And he is preeminent among that, being able to talk that way. Proclus, however, is taking the same structure, and he is showing how you can take that and relate it to Plato's Parmenides, how every line fits into a philosophical structure. He shows you how all of the thinkers, the thinkers that came before him, all the way including Plotinus, how they can be understood as contributing to this grand vision of philosophy that even includes the view of each of the gods into a final philosophical system where each part mingles together with other parts, making a coherent whole. He did the first major metaphysics, and if you want to get into pure metaphysics, you want to look at the theology, the elements of theology by this man, 211 propositions which are ordered axiomatically into a pure system. When this work, the elements of theology, you see, what happened is it went into the Arab world, into the Islamic world, and they thought it was Aristotle, and therefore they called it the theology of Aristotle, and much to their embarrassment, it turned out to be Proclus, much later, several hundred years. But this is the major work which went into and formed the basis of St. Thomas Aquinas and Albert Magus.
I thought that they were more influenced by, well,
most people think
thought this was Aristotle.
No,
so
yeah, no, that's right. No, that's right. It's all mixed. See, it's all. If you shake out and put the right names on things, the medieval age, as they now say, didn't have a pure Aristotle, because the Aristotle they got came out of Islamic Spain in the 11th century, and it was heavily influenced by Neoplatonic thought. And therefore, later periods when now you get moderns who study Aristotle and they go into St. Thomas, they get very confused about what St. Thomas is doing. But if they go backwards and pick up these works, and especially the missing piece is with Pseudo-Dionysius. Because Pseudo-Dionysius looks like an avid student of Proclus. And Pseudo-Dionysius laid the foundations for the whole Christian theology.
Back to Aristotle, though, isn't there some controversy about, first of all,